Before we get to today's podcast, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Analytic. Are you a business owner? Need expert help with bookkeeping, payroll, virtual CFO, or analytic services so you can focus on growing that business? You need to hire Analytic. They'll take care of day-to-day concerns while giving you insights about your company for better long-term decisions. You can find them at analytic.io. That's ANALYTIQ.io. You can also email info@analytic.io and follow @TheAnalytic, same spelling, on Twitter. Say 5 Reasons sent you, and if you sign up or refer someone who does, you'll receive a $200 Amazon gift card. And now, on with the podcast.
Welcome into episode 50. Can't believe we're at 50 already of the 5 Reasons flagship podcast on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I always say I'm here as always with Chris Whittingham. I am not with Chris Whittingham today. Chris not able to do this podcast. He will be back for the podcast that we do next week, and you surely should check out one of the new podcasts in our network, Pitch Invasion, which he's working hard on. That's our soccer podcast. But for today, I'm going to be doing this one solo with a guest who I will introduce in a second. One thing you definitely want to check out our Twitter feed at 5 Reasons Sports. That's the number 5 Reasons Sports. We have a lot of announcements, polls, contests, all kinds of stuff there. A couple of the announcements this week were pretty cool. You already know that we have the other podcasts of 3 Yards Per Carry. That's our Dolphins podcast, Miami Heat Beat, and also Ballscast in our network. This week we announced that we're going to be adding another podcast to our network. O.J. McDuffie, one of the great Dolphins of the past 25 years, one of the most popular Dolphins, somebody who has stayed in our community, well-liked by the community, hosted a radio show for a long time. He is going to team up with Seth Levitt, who worked for years for the Dolphins and also for the Jason Taylor Foundation. They're going to do a podcast called Fish Tank, Dolphins Tales from the Deep. We think it's a perfect complement to our 3 Yards Per Carry podcast. 3 Yards Per Carry goes into the current Dolphins. This one's going to go back through memory lane. It's going to be O.J. McDuffie sitting there with Seth and some of the favorite Dolphins in history, names that you know. I don't want to give them all away, but you probably know who some of those guys might be, telling stories and then relating it in some way to what's going on here in 2018. So very exciting. But speaking of the Dolphins, we've been trying to bring on some guests here with expertise, guys who have ended up in the media in one form or fashion. Sage, I'm not totally surprised that you went the media route. You're always a good talker.
Yeah, but I wasn't much of a talker, not in the locker room. I think that was the thing of a backup quarterback, was it was sort of a be seen and not heard type of situation, at least from, out. You couldn't have your own radio show. You didn't get interviewed that much. Your job was just sort of say very little and support the starting quarterback and be sort of the good teammate. But once you're done, it's nice to finally sort of be allowed to have a voice and your job's not on the line because of it.
Yeah, I actually spent 12 years. That's how you spent 12 years in the NFL, 4 with the Dolphins. We're talking to Sage Rosenfels. You did, now Sage, I think you did have something, if I remember way back. There's one thing I think you stepped out to do. Didn't you have a day with Sage? Wasn't that something that went on? Am I bringing up a bad memory there?
No, it wasn't a bad memory. It was a sort of mismanaged PR campaign in the sense that I was trying to raise money for some charities that I was working with, and including one with my sister. And it was sort of a rent a Sage, I believe, was the actual phrase that was used. And nothing really happened with that, but definitely one of those strange days of that I probably have sort of forgotten about until now of my NFL career.
Well, I'm glad to bring it up for you. And again, spent 12 years in the NFL. A lot of you probably remember him best from Houston. Obviously, played a number of other cities. And the 4 years with the Dolphins, I remember covering the game in Baltimore that you started, and a few others. And there were people, around these parts and who wanted you to get more playing time, including a couple.
Do you remember who returned a kickoff for a touchdown in that Baltimore Dolphins game in 2004, Week 17?
Yes, it was Week 17. I remember being in the stands there, right down the street from where I went to college. I do not remember who returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Who was that, Sage?
Well, I've asked 2 questions from this game. Well, I actually have 3 questions from this game for Dolphins fan. Wes Welker returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Who was my backup quarterback in this game?
Oh, my God. Oh, boy. All right, hold on. Can I cheat? Can I cheat a little bit?
He's a head coach in the NFL.
Okay. Oh, was it? Well, I'm trying to think of former Dolphins who are now head coaches in the NFL. Hold on. Did he get a snap in the game? Because I remember you playing the whole way there.
No. Jason Garrett.
Ah,
Jason
Jason Garrett.
signed as it was AJ Feely. J.C. Bird gotten hurt, and so AJ Feely started about the last 6 games, and then week 17 he got hurt. But we had added Jason Garrett as sort of the veteran third quarterback who had spent some time, I believe, like in the Fox broadcast booth earlier in that season. So I got to have, and then the next season, Jason was my quarterback's coach under Nick Saban. So that was a very interesting first start of my career at Baltimore Ravens, where we had about 3 or 4 wins at that point in the season, and Deion Sanders was playing in the slot, and they had Ed Reed and obviously Ray Lewis and a young Terrell Suggs and Chris McAllister, I believe, was a really good corner. And Chris Chambers threw a touchdown pass, an 80-yarder to Chris Chambers in the first play of the game. That was a nice way to start. It didn't stay all good the rest of the game, but not a bad way to start in my first start.
Yeah, we won't go over the numbers on that one. I was going to mention the Chambers thing, but I mean, you guys did put up 23 points, so I mean, you were productive offensively, even though things didn't go particularly well. Speaking of Chambers, we're planning on getting him on a future pod. Chris was always the guy who was in my ear saying that you should be starting. So like you say, there were certain guys on that team who were.
You need to get Chris Chambers on your show and make sure you talk about me. So that would tell you what, those teams, 2002, 3, 4, and 5 with the Dolphins those were, for me, I was a really young player, interesting years. You had the Ricky Williams saga with that. Obviously, we had this great defense, Junior Seau and, Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor, multiple Hall of Famers on that defense, and a whole bunch of other just really good players. Pat Surtain, Sam Madison, Agoulier was a young guy, I think in his 3rd or 4th year, and it was a really fascinating time to be a Dolphins player. But yeah, everyone was on Ricky's back and this, that, and the other, and I'm like, let the guy be. He already has anxiety issues from too many questions and just too much people into his personal life, and I felt like he was being attacked left and right, and so that was sort of the beginning of sort of the beginning of the end, really, for the whole Dave Wannstedt staff, and then Nick Saban coming in. That was quite the transition as well.
Yeah, you played for some interesting coaches. I mean, you played for Saban, you played for Spurrier. I mean, you kind of run the gamut with. I know, obviously, you played for Kubiak, but yeah, a lot of different guys that you played with. Before we get
I got one for you. Last question. Quarterbacks coach and coordinator in that same Baltimore Ravens game.
Oh boy! All right, coordinator. Well, it wasn't Norv anymore, right? So
Norv had left.
Norv was gone. Quarterbacks coach. I mean, I was looking up your receivers. Do you even remember who your second receiver was starting that game? I bet you don't remember. Chris Chambers and who?
Well, no, not Marty Booker. Marty Booker was hurt. A guy named Gilmore.
Yes.
Who was extremely fast. Yeah. So my offensive coordinator, Chris Forster,
in
that game, originally signed to be the tight ends coach, and then Norv left, and they, for some reason, didn't make Mark Trestman, who was the quarterbacks coach. They did not make Trestman, who had just been the Raiders coordinator, because they were concerned he was going to throw the ball, too much, and Dave wanted to run the football and sort of old style football, and we really struggled offensively the entire year, and that was Chris Forster as a Miami Dolphin the first time around.
Right, and he wasn't the original choice to be offensive coordinator. It was actually, if I remember correctly, wasn't it Joel Collier that they went to first? I think in 2000,
exactly right.
in 2004, yep. And Joel basically gave up the job after a week, and then they had Trestman. I remember writing a big profile about Collier, and then like a week later he was out, and then they had a choice, as you said, to go with Trestman, this experienced guy, or go with Forster, who's made other kinds of news over the past year. And you're right. They went with Forster. That was the decision that they made. I mean, one of the other things I heard was not just that Trestman wanted to throw the ball more, but that Dave viewed him as a threat to his job ultimately. And so that was one of the things that was out there, and that if Trestman was the offensive coordinator, that ultimately might mean the end of Dave.
It's funny the way you describe it. Like, there was always so much weird politics drama going on. Like, there was more drama upstairs than there was in the locker room. on those football teams, the players got along with each other great. And offense and defense, and also that team's offensive line. They all the previous years guys had gotten really old fast, and probably another reason Ricky Williams quit or was probably smoking so much weed that the line got really young. It was all these first and second year guys, and they really struggled that year. So yeah, that was a crap storm of a season, 2004 Miami Dolphins.
I'm glad to bring back all these memories for you. All right, so let's transition. Let's transition a little bit here to the present, because I know you serve as an analyst these days, and we wanted to get to quarterback situations around the NFL. And there's a lot of different types of quarterback situations now, so we're going to kind of group them together a little bit. But I want to start with part one, because this is still primarily a Dolphins audience here that listens to this podcast, and start with Ryan Tannehill. And I want to get into a couple things with you about Ryan. Is there any concern for you with him missing as much time as he's missed? He's missed one full season and parts of another season because of the knee injury. And he is a guy who liked to get out of the pocket a little bit too and make some plays. So that's something to look for. And secondarily, would you be concerned at all if you were a Dolphin fan that, although it appears that they had a pretty good draft, or Dolphin fans are fairly satisfied with it, that once again they did not take a quarterback in this draft, after saying again that they wanted to try to take one every year? So let's start with the injury concern. Would you, as a quarterback, if you had that kind of injury, a knee injury that again had to get operated on after the fact, after there was a re-injury of it, would that be a concern for you entering training camp?
No, I don't think so. And that's just because as quarterbacks, you generally don't have to run as much. It helps to be a guy who can run around a lot. It helps Aaron Rodgers, but Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, Tom Brady probably runs a 6.40 at this point, and he obviously had his knee and missed basically an entire season. So no, it doesn't bother me as a quarterback that he sort of jacked up his knee. It's not a Teddy Bridgewater full blowout knee type of situation either. I actually think that to have a year to sort of sit back and watch the whole organization, the way the coach coaches and the way he calls plays, and to work, be around the coach on the sidelines and their demeanor and all those things. You learn a whole bunch sometimes by watching. For me, most of my career, I watched in games, and it really helped me when I actually got into games and in practices to be out there, because I've sort of collected all this information by not being out there sort of in the vacuum. And so I actually think it'll help Ryan Tannehill that he sat out last year. And he played really well, pretty dang well 2 years ago. He didn't go to the Pro Bowl or anything, but I believe he had a fairly high quarterback rating, good touchdown to interception ratio, and one of his better seasons. And so I think coming off that injury, that doesn't worry me. He's gonna, over time, by the way, have to rely less on his legs and more on his arm. That's just sort of the way it goes in the NFL. Is you can rely on your legs a little bit when you're young, but as you get older, it's all about understanding sort of the science of the game and blitzes and protections and how pass patterns work with defensive coverages and all those things, and really sort of sharpen your craft with the knowledge of the game, because physically, just naturally, you're gonna become more unathletic as you get older. And if you want to play for a long time in the NFL, 14, 15, 16 years, believe me, your ability to hurt defenses with your legs gets less and less every single season.
So let's look at their situation going forward, because if you're not particularly concerned about the injury, and as you mentioned, Tannehill played well with Adam Gase before he got hurt. The Dolphins were 8-5. He particularly the last 8 games of that, where they were 7-1, he had a very high quarterback rating. He seemed to be, connecting with sort of more of a broad range of receivers, which is also something to look at this year, because they were so target heavy with Jarvis Landry, and they're going to have to spread it out a lot more this year. But I just want to get your perspective, because we're going to talk about some of these first-round quarterbacks going forward. Now, the Dolphins at number 11 were not in position to get any of the top 4 guys, as it turned out, unless they traded up like Arizona did to get Rosen. But what is your philosophy about taking a quarterback every year? Because we've seen some organizations, Green Bay has done a lot of this, New England has done a lot of this, and even when they've had elite guys, and either the guy they draft like a Rodgers becomes the next guy, or in the case of, say, what New England has done with Brissett and Garoppolo, that guy becomes a trade asset. What's your view? Is it worth taking a quarterback just to take a quarterback? Do you have to love a guy? What's your philosophy on that?
Well, I think I think Rick Spielman, by the way, when he was sort of with the Dolphins or maybe after the Dolphin years, he sort of had sort of taken that motto also of let's try to draft somebody 6th round, 7th round every single season. I think it's because the quarterback position is so important. It's the most important position on a football team, maybe in an entire organization. But it's so important. And so, as we've seen, there's 5 guys drafted in the 1st round this year. 2 might be Hall of Famers and 3 might be terrible. And we have no idea which one is going to be which. And that's sort of the incredible, thing about it. You see Tom Brady, Kurt Warner, as we know, the list goes on and on and on of guys who were drafted 5th, 6th, 7th round, undrafted guys, guys like Rich Gannon, that had great NFL careers. So if it's, a 7th round pick, probably not going to be a superstar left guard or defensive end, pass rusher guy, but, maybe there's a 1 in 10 chance he ends up being Kurt Warner or a Tom Brady. And, if you can get a Kurt Warner or Tom Brady in the 6th or 7th round, once every 10 years, it's worth probably all those wasted, 6th and 7th round picks on quarterbacks that never even, made the practice squad.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, if you look at your career here, I'm looking at total passing yards out of that draft class. You were 5th all time in your career, right behind AJ. Quincy Carter was 3rd. He had kind of a star course career. It looked like he was actually going to be Dallas's starter for a while, and that didn't work out. The number 1 quarterback in that draft in terms of yardage, I'm sure you know who that is, right? Dolphins had a couple shots at him.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, and that was Dolphins. Yeah, you're right, a couple shots at him. And tell you what, the San Diego Chargers, they drafted LaDainian Tomlinson with the 5th overall pick that year. I believe it was the 5th overall pick, and then got Drew Brees in the 2nd round. And so, that was a super interesting draft. Originally, they had the 1st pick in the draft that season, San Diego, but they traded to Atlanta, who then selected Michael Vick.
Yeah, it's interesting. Drew Brees, 70,445 passing yards. Next in that draft class was Michael Vick with a little over 22,000. So that Brees pick worked out pretty good. All right, we'll be back with Sage Rosenfels in a minute. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. We want to introduce Greenlight Tech. Greenlight Tech is a concierge IT company that offers a full, comprehensive suite of services. If you run a business in Florida, Greenlight Tech can help you streamline all of your IT services. They understand that many businesses, big and small, waste a lot of time getting IT right. Greenlight Tech will advise, monitor, support, and keep your important data backed up and secure, and even manage your service vendors. Their full services suite includes cloud backup, email hosting, and telecom services. You can visit greenlighttech.com. That's greenlighttech.com, or call 561-325-9997. That's 561-325-9997 if you want to find out more. And if you reference 5 Reasons, they will offer you a free network assessment. And if you sign up, your first month of service will be free. All right, let's move on to number 2 here, and something that you're familiar with. You've done a lot of coverage of the Vikings. And I found this to be a really interesting situation because it's not often, Sage, that you have a team that gets as far as the Vikings did last year, appears to have 3 pretty good quarterback options on their roster, depending on how you believed Bridgewater was going to come back, whether or not you believed Keenum's emergence last year was for real, and then whether you believe Bradford can stay healthy for longer than 3 weeks. And so any of those 3 guys they could have gone with, and they chose not to go for any of them and kind of became the dark horse candidate to get Kirk Cousins when everybody, I think a lot of people, we did a pod on this with someone I think Jason Cole, and he was projecting, and a lot of people were projecting that Kirk Cousins would end up in Denver or maybe the Jets, but he ends up in Minnesota. And I was just curious what you thought of them kind of changing the quarterback room as much as they did, and is Cousins, in your view, a big upgrade over the 3 guys that they let go?
Well, so a couple of things here. One, the Bradford and Bridgewater, they definitely weren't coming back. I think the Vikings just did not want to deal with a possible another injury to the quarterback position. There's a great saying that they regularly use around the Vikings organization. It was an old Bud Grant saying, your best ability is your availability. And Bradford was only available for a few games last year, it seemed like, and obviously Bridgewater come out with his knee injury. So you're really talking about Case Keenum. Was he the best quarterback out there for the dollar and yada, yada. I think what the Vikings decided to do was see if they could get the best guy, whatever it was going to cost them. Let's get the best guy because they believe they've got a window over the course of the next 3 or 4 years that they've got a loaded defense. They've got a really good young tailback. They've just signed a couple offensive linemen to pretty expensive deals from other teams, which was much improved last year. Kyle Rudolph has got a couple more decent years left, I think. They've got some good young receivers. They feel like they've got this sort of a window to win a Super Bowl. So when you have that chance, man, you got to go after the best quarterback possible. That's just available in any way. And so that's what they did. I really thought he might go to the Jets. I think if the Jets made a sort of equivalent type of run at Kirk Cousins, he may have gone there. That's because of their offensive coordinator, Jeremy Bates. Kyle Shanahan, who was Kirk Cousins' first coach in Washington. Kirk Cousins loves that style of offense. Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, who else was on that staff? Jeremy Bates. And so I think that Cousins really, really believes in the detail, the style of that offense, the play action, and all these different things that he was trying to get in a situation that was going to run in that type of offense so he could feel really comfortable, in that scheme, in that detailed scheme. And so that didn't work out. The Jets didn't come in with nearly the offer of the Vikings, so he went to the Vikings. I think he's hoping that John DeFilippo up there, has the detail and the scheme, and those two work together. That's going to be, to me, just as much as Kirk Cousins was a big acquisition for Minnesota this year. Offensive coordinator John DeFilippo, that is going to be a really interesting situation to look at every single game this year. He's going to be probably ridiculed a little bit, here and there, critiqued a lot, probably each game, and definitely by me, because Pat Shurmur did a heck of a job, last year, and with really changing that football team, and they were a good running football team. Case Keenum obviously had his breakout season. Hopefully, DeFilippo can have those type of results for the Vikings.
Yeah, and I guess the big question here is that we've posed on the pod a little bit is beyond sort of the coaching he'll get and the personnel, which I think the personnel in Minnesota is pretty good, particularly if Dalvin Cook comes back 100% healthy. I mean, people forget about that who aren't based up there. Like, that team got that far without someone who may have been, their best offensive playmaker last year, the way the things were starting. But I guess this is the big question for you. Is Kirk Cousins elite to you? Is he, would you put him in that category with the top 5, 6, 7 guys?
No, not even. I don't even know if I put him, I don't think I put him in the top 10 in the NFL. He's a top 15 guy for sure. He's probably somewhere between 8 and 12 is my guess. But at the end of the day, what are you looking for? You're trying to win a Super Bowl, right? Well, only a few teams, maybe 6, 7 guys can say, listen, we really have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That is a huge strength on our football team. We're going to, load up at Atlanta. We're going to load up a wide receiver. We're going to do this. We're going to put all these pieces around Matt Ryan. The Saints have been doing that for years. Obviously, the Packers, they know their best player is their quarterback. For the rest of the teams, how can we make sort of a championship caliber football team without having a top 10 quarterback or a top 6 quarterback? That's defense. That's running the football. That's, building up the offensive line. That's all these other ways you can win football games without an elite quarterback. And of course, the teams who are sort of quarterback is their strength. They're probably going to spend more money on the weapons around that great player and paying that great player but then you have sort of less money to go around for those other things like defense, maybe like offensive line, the running game, but you're going to rely more on that quarterback. We're seeing that happen in Seattle right before our eyes. As soon as Russell Wilson sort of got the big quarterback or big contract, that team, the talent has just sort of gotten a little bit worse just because you can't afford all those players anymore.
Right.
And that's sort of a concern in Minnesota because they have a whole bunch of guys coming up on contract here in the next year or two. Trey Waynes, one of their Pro Bowl linebackers, Anthony Barr, They've got some young. Rick Spielman and that crew up there have done an excellent job over the course of about 7 years in a row with free agent acquisitions and obviously in the draft.
You know what's crazy about that is because I covered Rick and had a bit of a relationship with Rick when he was down in Miami. But for Dolphin fans to hear that, because I think what happened in Miami and Davey. I know, and I think what happened there was that every Rick decision got grouped as a Dave decision. And I mean, there were a couple in particular, and I've told this story before, so I can tell it again. But after they made the Eddie Moore pick, instead of taking
the Eddie Moore pick is the Eddie Moore Anquan Boldin pick.
Yes.
That we really needed a second wide receiver. That is sort of like goes down in infamy of terrible Dolphins draft picks. It's like Anthony, or it's like Ted Ginn over whoever the Dolphins wanted at that time.
Well, this one was worse actually. Yeah, well, Rodgers, but as you know, Sage, a lot of teams passed on Aaron Rodgers, but this one was staring right at them. And after they made that pick, and they were starting to get killed for it because, I mean, Eddie Moore was not what they expected. And, I'd heard basically that in the meetings, what had happened was, Dave said, I need a special teams linebacker. And I know that Robert Ford, who was the wide receiver coach at the time, was like, you're kidding me. Like, we've got this kid. He's from Pahokee. We've all seen him grow up at FSU. He made the transition to receiver. He's physical. He catches the ball. He's got leadership qualities. And so basically after all this happened,
by the way, we basically, if I recall, had Chris Chambers, Aranda Gadsden maybe coming off an injury, I feel like.
Yes.
James McKnight, who was basically really, really fast, but not really not a number 2 or not a number 1, maybe a 3 or a 4. We really needed that second receiver spot so badly. And then first game of the year, I believe they were playing Arizona, playing at Detroit, and I think he had over 300 yards receiving in his first game. And it was just, and Eddie Moore was like, I don't think he dressed.
No, I don't think. Well, the only thing Eddie Moore did in Miami was he lost a bar fight, but that was basically it. But Sage, Rick called me up to his office.
That may have been the beginning of the end. By the way, I brought up it was something later when Norv left. I actually think it was the Eddie Moore draft. What are we doing? And then at the press conference, it was like, yes, he's going to be a really good special teams player for us this year. He's not going to probably play much linebacker, and we're all like, we need a receiver.
In the second round, the special teams linebacker. Just one quick thing on this stage. So Rick calls me up in his office, and he pulls out. He doesn't even say anything. He just calls me in the office, and he pulls out his grades. Okay, and he said, "I just want you to look at this." And the way he graded players was, it was like if you were a late first round pick, you were a 1.19. Whatever was after the decimal point was the round, and then if you were like a 9, that meant late in the round. If it was like a 1-1, that's like, okay, that's the guy you pick first or second in the draft. So he puts these things down. He says, I just want you to see my grade. This is not our grade. This is my grade on Eddie Moore and Anquan Boldin. And he puts it down. He says, this is Eddie Moore, 1.31. So I'm like, okay, you had him as a high third-round pick. You guys reached a little bit. That's not too bad. Goes, here was my pick on Anquan Boldin. He goes, 1.19. Who do you think I wanted in that meeting?
I'm telling you, like that was, and I see you at events where, but that was the thing. There was just so much between Dave and Bobby Rick and Dave, and it was just sort of all over in that organization at that time. But our defense was so good. Jimmy Johnson had, before I got there, drafted, he said, Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor and the defense, and Tim Bowens was just amazing on the inside. And the defense was Pat Surtain and Sam Madison. And their scheme, they stopped the run, and, man, we were hard to throw against. It was that defense kept us in a lot of football games, but they started making mistakes, for whatever reason. Obviously, that was a huge one.
Yeah, that was a huge one. And then the other one we mentioned, Breeze, when they took Jamar Fletcher over Breeze, even though they had at the time 2 elite corners in Surtain and Madison in their prime.
They had 2 elite corners, and Fletcher was a zone corner. Mm-hmm. And we played all man-to-man. I mean, we played all Sam Madison did for about 10 years was chase people. That's all. There was almost no zone where you'd see him, jam the receiver and stay there. It was chasing and undercutting people all day long. And then they go out and draft, as you said, in a first-round pick.
Late first-round pick.
A third corner who was a zone guy. It was because supposedly they were worried about Santana Moss, who the Jets had drafted as their sort of third wide receiver. I think it was Corbett, Santana Moss, and was it the Florida State, the real fast guy from Florida State?
Lavernius
Cole. The guy's name.
Lavernius
Cole. So they had these three receivers, and how we're going to match up with those guys? We got to draft another corner. So yeah, that wasn't a very good pick. Obviously Chris Chambers in the second round. That was a very good pick. Chris Chambers was a really good player for a quarterback to play with and to throw to, and really one heck of a teammate.
Yeah, really, really good guy, and we're going to get him on the pod here soon. We'll be back with more with Sage Rosenfels, but first, a word from another of our sponsors. Hurricane season is again upon us, and thousands of Floridians have not received fair compensation for their Hurricane Irma claims. If your claim was denied, underpaid, or assessed below your deductible, you need a free consultation with an experienced insurance attorney. You've got to check out the law office of Lloyd J. Heilbrunn. Call 561-727-3636 or contact through heilbrunnlaw.com. That's HEILBRUNNLAW.com. The law office of Lloyd J. Heilbrunn handles insurance, personal injury, and wrongful death cases on a no-fee, no-cost unless there's a recovery basis, so there's no risk to you. All you got to do is say that 5 Reasons sent you. Let's move on to a couple more quarterback situations. We'll blow through these a little bit quicker. Denver, obviously, we talked a little about Keenum's situation. It's been curious to me, Sage, how somebody like Elway, who obviously has such a familiarity and an expertise at the position, has found it difficult to find the guy out there. I mean, Peyton obviously just got old and got hurt, and so that played into it. But the Osweiler thing, they made the right decision by not matching that offer. But then they drafted.
Well, they drafted Osweiler in the second round. They drafted Paxton Lynch at the end of the first round. I mean, that's 0 for 2. I mean, this is not taking a flyer in a 6th or 7th rounder. Like, they must have liked those guys. And what's interesting, and they're both really big, tall guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're 6'6", 6'7" guys. So it's interesting, and they're not always a big guy, obviously, but it's interesting they've gone after these two really tall quarterbacks and really missed pretty badly over 2.
So what is Keenum's role there? Like, how does he fit? I mean, you think they've paid him, obviously. They didn't give him huge money, but they've paid him. So I would assume he's got the inside track over Paxton Lynch. I know they don't want to give up on Paxton Lynch entirely, but you would assume he's got the inside track there. How does he fit in Denver's system compared to the way that he played in Minnesota last year?
I think he fits. I don't know the system all that well. But as far as sort of fitting on the team on paper, he actually makes a ton of sense. I watched every Vikings game last year, covered him for The Athletic, and he's an accurate quarterback. He's more accurate than people realize. He's got a really quick release, which gets him out of a lot of trouble, sacks, and those types of things. He gets the ball out quick before the rush can get to him. He made good decisions 98% of the time last year. It seemed about once a game he'd make sort of a bonehead throw. He'd sort of throw one up, and it would either be intercepted or a linebacker would just drop it. And so it always sort of concerned you because their style was defense, running game. Even after Dalvin Cook got out, man, their running game really started to heat up with their 2 running backs. And so he played, as the year went on, probably a little more conservative. I think early in the year he was out there. He was sort of a gun. He is by heart. By his nature, by his training, he's a gunslinger. The guy threw for, look up his stats at the University of Houston. He threw for ungodly amounts of yards, like 20,000 yards in college or something like that. So that's his nature, throw the ball. But as the year went on, man, he really got good at managing, quote, unquote, managing football games, understanding, we have a 7 or 10 point lead on maybe a lesser opponent. I'm not going to take a lot of chances. I said he's accurate on the intermediate game. He kept them in games last year, and a lot of balls sort of bounced their way last year. With the Vikings, and so I think he's a good pick. He also is sort of a playmaker. He will sort of in an Aaron Rodgers type of way. When the pocket breaks down, he's sort of slippery and athletic because he's only 6 foot, so he's a good athlete and runs around well. But he does a good job of sort of making plays when things break down up front. He's one of those quarterbacks that makes the offensive line many times look better than they actually are. And Denver definitely needs a quarterback that can do that.
Yeah, I mean, their talent. You talk about a team whose talent eroded a little bit, and Seattle's a great example of it. Because I mean, they had not only was Seattle in a position where they had the cheap Russell Wilson contract, but they also drafted a lot of their elite guys late. I mean, you look at Sherman and some of the other players that performed really well for them over the years, and then once they had to get to second contracts with them, that whole thing blew up. A little of that happened with Denver too. So that roster is not quite as good as it was, although it does look like they're going to be pretty good at rushing the passer this year with their draft pick and with Von Miller. All right, let's move to number 4.
They did. As I said, they also lost. They lost Talib, and the players are getting a little bit older. So that Denver defense, which was dominant just a couple of years ago, sort of like Seattle was a few years ago, seems to have gotten old quick, or teams have been traded for for draft picks or whatever to get younger talent and not have to pay these huge salaries.
Yeah, it's transition that all these teams have to go through with the cap. More from Sage Rosenfels on NFL quarterbacks in a second, but first, a word from our Dolphins podcast, 3 yards per carry.
Not that we're always right on the 3 yards per carry podcast, but we tend to have a pretty high batting average.
It wouldn't surprise me if they pulled some sort of Stephon Anthony deal, with a kind of a guy who's on the perimeter on the bubble of giving up a 6th-round pick or whatever.
If I had to make a line, I would say Minkah Fitzpatrick is a clear-cut favorite to be taken at 11.
But I think number 1 overall is going to be Baker Mayfield with the Cleveland Browns.
And I don't think that Rashad Penny's going to end up here because I think he's going to go in the first round. So a guy that they can get in the 3rd and beyond is Kalen Ballage of Arizona State. On Saturday, justified. We'll win the Kentucky Derby. But wait, that's mostly me being right. Well, maybe Chris and Simon should get some editing software. So tune in every Thursday morning for the 3 yards per carry podcast on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, let's move to number 4. I put this on a poll at 5 Reasons Sports. A lot of people thought this was one of the more interesting quarterback situations, and that's Arizona. And I want to touch on this with you for a couple of reasons. One is, obviously, you've seen Bradford as much as he played in Minnesota, and he keeps sort of getting another chance, right? Like it was with the Rams, then it was with Philadelphia, then it's with Minnesota. When he plays, he always has this ridiculous completion percentage. Some of the other numbers don't quite translate. But what I want to get into more is the Rosen pick for this reason, because as you said, you were a backup quarterback, and so I mean, I knew you a little bit, obviously, from being around the team, but you weren't out there expressing your views. And I know you have views that go beyond football, and you express them now on Twitter. You can follow him at Sage Rosenfels 18. Like, you're not shy about sharing what you think about society, politics, and all that sort of stuff. Josh Rosen is not shy about that stuff either. And Josh Rosen, though, is going to be a starting quarterback. If it's not in his first year, it's certainly going to be in his second year, and he's going to be asked to be the face of a franchise. Where do you come down on that? Like, I mean, whether or not you share some of his views, would you be concerned at all about a guy who has views outside of football as the face of the team? So we know how so many quarterbacks around the league, they make a living by being vanilla, right? Like just not saying – I mean, Tom Brady has said very few interesting things in the past 15 years publicly. I mean, when he does, it's a big issue. Rodgers does. He's one who will speak out a little bit. Cam gets in trouble when he speaks out. But it's just one of those things that with that position, sometimes I feel like you're expected to just shut up and play to a certain degree. Would you have any concerns about Josh Rosen?
I don't have any concerns. I mean, just like I don't have concerns about Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich being good NBA coaches because they also speak out. I mean, there's football and there's things that are not football. It's interesting with the NFL and with the sport of football, everyone seems to sort of take everything overly serious. And, it's sort of a serious, intense sport. There's sort of this whole personality, like being a football guy, which means like your whole life is dedicated to the game, and you wake up at 3 a.m, you watch film until midnight every single day all year trying to find an edge. I mean, it's a little bit over the top and ridiculous. And I think Josh Rosen, who did grow up, with very educated, parents and very successful parents. I mean, he grew up rich. I think that's sort of the thing that probably also gives him an angle of, you know what, like if they don't want to pay me in football, I'll go make money doing something else. And you know, he sort of already has that. So maybe there's less risk there for him of, you know, upselling sponsors and not getting a shoe contract, or not, you know, if he speaks, you know, about politics or whatever. I don't look at it as a negative when players, you know, have other things in their life. I think it's actually great. And sometimes it might be politics. A lot of players, it's religion. Some it's, you know, community service. Players like to travel a ton in the off season. So, you know, that doesn't bother me at all. I'm more worried about guys like Baker Mayfield, to be honest with you, who have shown these signs of immaturity. That concerns me. Immaturity at the quarterback position is extremely concerning. Why? Because you're going to give a guy, I mean, he's going to get a $35 million guaranteed contract or somewhere around there. And the worst way to help somebody to mature is to give them a ton of money and a ton of fame. Well, that's Baker Mayfield right now. He's going to be more famous. He's going to have more money. Is that going to help him mature? I don't know. But, you know, so I think that Josh Rosen, I prefer players who are smart. You know, Rich Gannon's a very smart guy. He was a very sort of intellectual guy. A lot of times that means that you become obsessed with the X's and O's of the game, which I think is a good thing. And it also means that I think Josh Rosen sees big picture. He probably sees how his role as the Arizona Cardinals quarterback and how it sort of fits into the grand scheme of things, not just with Arizona, but with the NFL and also maybe in the country. You know, what is that, you know, that role, big or small? And I think it's, you know, smart people understand where their sort of seat is on the bus in society. And I think he'll be refreshing, to be honest with you.
Well, that's one of the differences. You mentioned the NFL and the way that players are kind of perceived there. We did a pod about why, in our view, the NBA has gained on the NFL a little bit. NFL is still king sport. There's no question about that. But if you look at ratings, you know, one of the things that's pointed to is obviously the kneeling and that hurt the NFL's ratings. NBA players have been as outspoken or more outspoken than NBA and NFL players, and NBA ratings are up 15% this year. I mean, they're not down; they're up. Whereas you have NASCAR ratings are way down, and obviously they've been very, you know, NASCAR is just, you know, they haven't had any, you know, lack of allegiance to the flag or anything along those lines in NASCAR. And one of the theories that Chris and I have had when we've talked about this on the pod is that in the NBA audience, I think, is more willing to sort of hear, you know, social justice, you know, arguments and that kind of thing, whereas the NFL audience is not. Now, part of that may be because the NBA audience tends to be a little more diverse, maybe a little bit younger. I think that plays into it. But there's a clear line of demarcation. Like, NBA players are not getting less popular because they speak out.
Yeah, so it's very clear. And if you really, I just look at the demographics of the players, demographics of the fans. You know, football is not an inner city sport, really. It's really more of a suburb a sport, or even, you know, small town type of sport. Basketball is a, you know, sort of a city sport in general. A lot of players come from the inner cities and cities and things like that. And also stadiums are always, you know, right in the cities and stuff. So, I mean, most, you know, Chicago or wherever, you know, the inner city football is not that good in a lot of big American cities. So there's a demographic of that, demographic of the fans. You know, the NFL really started probably since 9/11, but definitely in 2009. They probably realized that, you know, they said they made that connection with the military. Everything that the NFL, the NBA is, everyone does is try to increase their fan base, and they have to connect with the military, trying to, you know, market their product better and connect with somebody that, you know, really I think everyone appreciates, you know, in the United States. And so the NBA didn't do that, not because they don't love America or appreciate the military, but that wasn't, you know, the decisions that they made. And so, yeah, every sport has their different sort of marketing reasons and why they do things. And you know, I think TV ratings and all those things. I'll tell you this, the NFL, the ratings might be down a little bit. I think they're equivalent to general ratings around sort of the country. The NBA's are up, but general ratings of the other shows. People are, you know, watching more Netflix and getting their information on Twitter, or, you know, some of my kids, they just watch a lot of YouTube. They don't even watch, you know, regular television anymore. So there's a lot of that going on as well. But it's really an interesting time to study all of it, because younger people are, you know, switching off the the TV sets and are on other devices. But the NFL, I promise you, is making more money this year than it made last year.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, they still find a way to make money. But just an interesting topic. Real quick here before we move to these other situations in Part 5. Rosen or Bradford, who do you think is going to be their starter this year? What do you think they end up doing?
So I believe that when they signed Sam Bradford to, I believe, a 1-year, $20 million deal, the moment that ink was dry was the moment they were looking for Sam Bradford's replacement. All right, so they've obviously found him in Rosen. So my guess is that Sam Bradford starts the season. He'll get hurt at some point,
Right.
which is right. I mean, there's going to be a deal where, he twisted this or hurt this or whatever in week 6, and he's going to be out for 2 weeks, and then we're going to see Josh Rosen. If Josh Rosen does terrible, we'll see Sam Bradford again. If Josh Rosen plays halfway well, they might just stay with Josh Rosen and say it's going to be one of those sort of rebuilding years with the young quarterback to get him experience. Eli Manning, he sat out about the first 10 games, I believe, of his rookie season. I think the Giants were even like 7-3. They benched Kurt Warner for Eli, and they said basically we're going to, that's the wash on that season. And so I can see them, doing that. I can see Josh Rosen playing at some point, and I can definitely see him finishing out the last, month of the season or so.
All right, yeah, I can see a similar scenario out there. Obviously, Bruce Arians not there anymore, but from all indications had sort of some influence on the Josh Rosen pick. So, and they went up and got him too. So clearly they're going to try to make him their starter sooner rather than later. We'll continue the conversation in a minute, but first, want to introduce you to another of the great podcasts in the growing 5 Reasons Sports podcast network, and that is Miami Heat Beat.
Welcome to the Heat Beat Podcast. I'm your host, Giancarlo Navas, and this week we had Evan Cohen of ESPN West Palm and Sirius XM Mad Dog Radio. We talk trades, off-season scenario, how better is justice, and Evan also eviscerated LeBron.
Well, he brought Miami championships, please. Miami taught him how to win, brought him 2 championships. I remember 06. Where's his before coming to Miami? Give me a freaking break. Okay, I mean, that was ridiculous. I was on the air that night. They won a championship. I was doing weekends and nights and random fill-in stuff on QAM. They win a championship, and I'm on the air all night. I don't remember talking about LeBron that night, so I don't want to hear that.
Find that and more on the latest Miami Heat Beat podcast. You can find us at MA Heat Beat on Twitter, and expect a new episode every Monday until the end of the NBA playoffs, now on the 5 Reasons Podcast Network.
Let's get to Part 5, and let's do these rapid fire here. We've got 4 other situations with rookie quarterbacks, and I just want to kind of go through them with you real quick, and you give us sort of an assessment of how you think they would play out. Let's start, since obviously this is Dolphins country here, let's start with the Jets. And they draft Sam Darnold. They still have Josh McCown, who didn't have a bad year last year. I think he's going to be 39 years old this year. And then they end up with Bridgewater also. So they've got 2 veteran guys and 1 guy that they drafted in the top 5. How do you see that playing out?
Well, Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the starter for sure. No, I'm just kidding. To be honest with you, I sort of think I'm a little worried that Teddy may not even make the team. I believe it's guaranteed only about $500,000, and so that's nothing. That's pennies for the NFL teams, the salary cap, if they feel like they don't need that player. So that's my concern with Teddy. But it's probably a similar situation to Arizona. I can definitely see Josh McCown sort of start in the season. Definitely starting training camp in the first preseason games as a starter. And then the Jets will know a lot more. All these teams will know a lot more by literally the end of the first mini camp. Maybe not a rookie mini camp, but the first real, when the varsity's all there, those sort of first practices, you sort of see, where is this kid at? How well was he coached in college? How detailed was how complicated was their system? Is he physically ready to be a guy that, he just needs some seasoning and we can throw him out there, sort of the wolves in his rookie season. And no 2 guys are alike. And that's one of those things where you don't know what you're going to get until he's actually on campus. He's actually gone through some practices. It's not just meetings. It's not just throwing sessions. He's out there trying to complete passes against, another NFL defense. You learn a lot in those first mini camps.
Well, then we go to Buffalo, the other team in the division. This is, I would say, the most controversial of the picks. Josh Allen, to get a guy who struggled with his accuracy in college. They also added McCarron, who almost ended up with Cleveland last year, but has an opportunity to start. What do you think of Josh Allen? Does completion percentage in college matter that much to you?
No, not at all. And people point to like, well, Kyle Bowler had like a 48% completion percentage in college. Okay, well, I had a 51% in college, and I believe about a 63% in the NFL. So a couple things that go into that. I was actually a decently accurate quarterback in college. We were just in a system that wasn't super precise, and we're running little stick routes with our tight end and super easy completions. We were doing a lot of play action, a lot of sprint out, bootleg, more challenging passes, and we didn't have an advanced sort of passing game. All right, so I'm not worried about his completion percentage. I'm not really all that worried about his accuracy. I think that just gets better over time when you get more and more comfortable. He has this highest ceiling of all these quarterbacks. He's the guy that physically he sort of has Hall of Fame attributes, from his size, his athletic ability, his arm strength, all those types of things. I also believe he's going against really the worst of all the sort of veteran starters, A.J. McCarron. I believe he'd be the easiest guy to beat out. We might see, Josh Allen early, which is interesting. Buffalo made the playoffs last year. They got rid of Tyrod Taylor. I don't see them making the playoffs with A.J. McCarron or Josh Allen this year. But that I could see Josh Allen playing early. I do like the pick. I think he fits sort of the Buffalo. Josh Rosen going to Buffalo, I think, would have been a disaster. Josh Rosen doesn't want to live in Buffalo. He's not going to connect with that audience. A kid from Wyoming playing the snow half his games, he'll connect with that audience in Buffalo. I think that's actually sort of a match made in heaven.
That's an interesting. I didn't even think of it that way, but that's definitely interesting. Josh Rosen. I mean, Arizona. It's not quite L.A., but it's more cosmopolitan than Buffalo. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, two more here. Baltimore. And when they made the pick of Lamar Jackson, I joked that, well, it'll be Lamar Jackson who hands the Dolphins their annual loss in Baltimore, because I feel like we've been going through that for the last 15 years. Joe Flacco's had kind of an up and down run. I mean, that might be generous, actually, over the last 3 years. Like, you look at his numbers, he's regressed. I don't know if they're ready to replace him right away. I don't know how close to ready Lamar Jackson is. How do you see that one playing out?
Yeah, this sort of situation, Flacco sort of has not been criticized by a lot of people outside of Baltimore, because most people just don't pay attention to Baltimore that much. They're not one of those premier teams. He sort of has that, sort of gold still on him that he won a Super Bowl years ago. But if you look at his numbers, man, they've just got worse and worse and worse. I believe he finished maybe 2 seasons ago with about a 69 quarterback rating or something, or in the low 70s. It was very low. But you don't see this national criticism. Well, now they finally actually went out, and with Ozzie Newsome's sort of last first-round pick, they got this young quarterback who is the complete opposite of Joe Flacco. Other than Tom Brady, Joe Flacco might be the most sort of, iron deer, stand in the pocket passer, not going to move around quarterback in the entire NFL. Those two are probably about as close to each other as possible. Obviously, Baltimore, they want to go in a complete opposite direction and get somebody that can, obviously move around and be a little bit more of a playmaker. I'll tell you this, with Lamar Jackson, I actually liked the way the ball came out of his hand in college. I watched enough of his college football games, and I watched enough highlights. I thought he was a pretty good thrower in college. What concerned me is I watched the combine, and the ball, the NFL ball and the college balls are different. And I really struggled when I got to the NFL of just sort of having the ball comfortably come my hands. It looked to me when Lamar Jackson was at the combine this last year, the ball wasn't coming out of his hand naturally. He did not look comfortable throwing the NFL ball, so that's what concerns me. And not his college tape that didn't look good, and completion percentage and this, that, and the other, making the NFL throws, is actually he looked to me uncomfortable at the combine throwing the NFL football.
That's interesting. Yeah, and not a lot of people talked about that. You mentioned Flacco here. Just to go through his quarterback rating, 2013, he dipped all the way to 73. And then 91 had a bit of a resurgence. Then 83, 83, and 80. And as you know, that rating is inflated these days. So, I mean,
my career quarterback rating, I believe, is 81. So, okay. I mean, I was a 12-year backup. So we're basically saying the last 3, or really say 4 out of the last 5 years, he's played like an NFL backup or worse and had one good season.
And you can argue too that again, as the rules have continued to change, that I mean the average rating is up over the past few years since when you were playing more consistently. So yeah, you could say actually he's played below an NFL backup during the past 3 years. So that's not great. And you look a little deeper in the numbers. I mean, last year was 18-13 touchdown to interception. The year before 20-15. The year before 14-12. So he just has not been great. All right, final one here. You mentioned Baker Mayfield a little bit earlier. Cleveland's 1-31 in the past 2 seasons, so it can't get much worse. They've added Landry. They've added Carlos Hyde in the backfield, so they've got better personnel. They have. We'll see whether Gordon can stay on the field for them this year. That's a big question. But they seem to have some offensive personnel with Duke Johnson coming back, and like you said, Tyrod Taylor did take Buffalo to the playoffs last year, even with his coach kind of submarining him a little bit and benching him for that one game. You've mentioned questions about Baker's maturity here. How long do you think they'll wait? Because I lived up in Cleveland basically for a year in 14-15. I know how the fans are up there when it comes to the Browns. They're going to be pushing for Baker to play. To me, that's a challenging situation for Tyrod Taylor. How do you think that plays out?
Well, I actually like what I've seen out of Baker since college. Since the college season ended, I like the way he's done his interviews and the way he's gone about his business. And my biggest concern was always maturity based off of those things in college. And that usually doesn't go well as you get all this money and fame in the NFL. So, but what I've seen so far, I really like. I also think that Baker understands he's really sitting on sort of the opportunity to make hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, he's right on the edge of that. And he has a good 3-4 years here and shows what he can do and then plays the way he played in college. I tell you what, he was probably the most accurate, maybe him and Rosen, but I've read some studies. He was the most accurate of all these top quarterbacks in college as far as throws that he made and how many that he missed or were bad throws versus how many were on target. And he also makes pretty dang good decisions with the football. I'm an Iowa State guy. We're Big 12 conference. I've seen Baker Mayfield play a ton of college football games over the last 4 years. He makes a lot of really good decisions and stays away from a lot of bad plays for the most part. So he sort of has that Brett Favrean type. If he's a good player, it's because he sort of plays sort of the way Favre plays, and he does have a strong arm. He does all these attributes. It was this maturity thing, that I was always worried about. So how does this thing play out? I've always liked Tyrod Taylor. I've always been sort of thought that he got they went to the playoffs last year, and that includes Peterman at quarterback for one game, who was a disaster, throwing 6 picks, in the first half or whatever that was. So Tyrod Taylor must have played fairly well last year to get Buffalo, in the playoffs in that division of the AFC East. So he could definitely start, early in the year. My concern with the quarterback situation there is not the quarterbacks. It's the rest of the football team. I mean, they've been so bad the last 2 years. It's like that team doesn't need just a quarterback and maybe a running back and a receiver. They need like a lobotomy. I mean, there's something drastic needs to change with that football team. And maybe Baker Mayfield's sort of that guy. Maybe he's that sort of magic spice that they need. They need something. It's not just going to be accuracy and a guy who makes a few plays. It's going to be somebody that they can completely believe in. So Baker Mayfield or Tyrod Taylor, whoever plays this year, but Baker for long term, he's got to be able to connect with that football team to get them all believing that, man, Baker Mayfield's our guy. He's going to bring us to the promised land and then raise the level of all other 52 guys who are going to be on that roster this year.
Yeah, and I saw you make the point on Twitter. There were a couple people who were saying he was Manziel too, but as you said, he's a much better thrower of the football than Johnny Manziel. And also, whatever the maturity concerns are, I don't think they're the same as the maturity concerns with Manziel. Like it seems like Mayfield is really engaged with the game. I mean, has he occasionally sort of jumped out and done some nutty things? Yes, but I don't feel like it's the same as Manziel. All right, before we let you go, Sage, I have one question for you. Try to answer this relatively quickly, but again, as somebody who is willing to step out into this world a little bit, do you think we'll ever see Colin Kaepernick play in an NFL game again?
Probably not. I don't think so. based off of his last season in San Francisco. And that's the thing is, it's funny, he had 16 touchdowns and 4 picks there on this, I believe, a 2-win football team out there in San Fran. That was a complete disaster with sort of the Chip Kelly experiment. And after Harbaugh left, that team got, the defense got extremely old really fast. The whole thing sort of fell apart. But this is what I sort of do for a living. It's what I've been doing since I retired about 5-6 years ago, is I study quarterbacks. And Colin Kaepernick is at the end of that season, even that really bad year, I probably would have put him at the 25th best quarterback in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So yeah, obviously Eric Reed, who is the safety, I'm not sure what his situation is going to be in the NFL, long term. And because he kneeled next to him as well, so he was a starting safety in the NFL. Is he a Pro Bowler? No. Is he a Hall of Famer? No. But those guys had definitely the physical talent, to do it. So it's extremely interesting debate to the whole sort of Kaepernick, situation. By the way, Martin Luther King had a 30% approval rating when he died. Just an FYI on that. So I'm not trying to say Colin Kaepernick is Martin Luther King, but sometimes people who are trying to make drastic change in a country end up being sort of the scapegoat or there's a negative opinion of them early, and then later on history sometimes changes that opinion.
Yeah, we saw some pretty horrible quarterback play last year, and to watch the hoops that Houston went through to find quarterbacks that weren't Colin Kaepernick.
Incredible.
Right? After Deshaun Watson got hurt.
Chase Daniel, who's now the Bears quarterback, and I believe has signed a 2-year, $10 million deal. I think he's got 2 starts in his career, and he's made about $30 million. And really hasn't played at all recently. Backing up Breeze and stuff for the most of his career. But he's not just in the league; he's making a ton of money in the league, which is good for him. But I always say every Colin Kaepernick's at least their backup quarterback, because they all say we're doing whatever we can to win football games. If that was really the case, Colin Kaepernick would be a backup somewhere, because he's better than basically every backup in the NFL.
Gotcha. All right. Sage Rosenfels didn't make 2 starts in his career. He made 12, and won 6 of them. So that's you would be making much more than Chase Daniel money right now if you were still playing. Well, thank you, my friend. We appreciate you doing this. You can follow him at Sage Rosenfels 18. Also, he's with the Athletic Minnesota, so definitely check him out there. Posts a bunch of stuff on his Twitter feed. You can follow us at 5 Reasons Sports. That's the number 5. Again, subscribe to all the podcasts in our network: Miami Heat Beat, Ballscast, 3 Yards Per Carry, Pitch Invasion, and we got another one we're going to be announcing here before too long. Appreciate you doing it, Sage.
All right, Ethan. Thanks for having me on.